Have a seat by the fire. I was just about to tell a story that was passed down generations. This is a story of the sea, taking place a world away from here in the waters of the South Atlantic, in the year of our Lord 1917. The legendary German captain Felix von Luckner was sailing his clipper ship, the Seeteufel, on a raiding mission for the Kaiser. His goal was to disrupt the merchant shipping of his fatherland's enemies. The three-masted American-made clipper was outfitted with an auxiliary diesel engine and one 105mm gun. With this unique ship and his skilled crew, he managed the capture and destruction of 14 ships from various nations. The following is a tale of his largest quarry. Now, the biggest ship we captured in the Atlantic was a 9,800-ton British steamer loaded with champagne, the Horngarth. That was our banner day. She was well armed and had a wireless. She hove into sight one morning, and we could see that she would make a tough customer for our sailing ship to handle. But why not have a good look at her? We set the signal. Chronometer time, please. The way she paid no attention to the request said very clearly, "Let that old windjammer go buy a watch." But we had other devices. We had a smoke apparatus to send clouds rolling out of the galley. And on the galley roof was a dish loaded with magnesium, which when lighted produced a wicked red flame. We set the smoke and fire going and ran up distress signals. The Seeteufel was now the most dramatic-looking ship of fire you ever saw. 30 of my crew armed with rifles hid behind the rail, and Schmidt quickly dressed up as the captain's wife, the beautiful but simpering Josephina of the big feet. We had another apparatus which we now used for the first time. It was a kind of cannon made out of a section of smokestack. It was loaded with a powder charge, and you touched it off with a lit cigarette. It was harmless, but made a terrifying noise. You would have thought it a super dreadnought's full broadside. I picked 3 sailors who had the most powerful voices aboard, gave them large megaphones, and stationed them on the topmast yards of the mainmast and mizzen. If that steamer was short on courtesy, she was long on humanity. She came rushing heroically to the aid of the old sail ship that was blazing so dramatically just astern. She had a powerful wireless set, and as I stood on my bridge watching her as she steamed toward us, I could not take my eyes off the 5-inch gun on her deck. What was our little pop gun beside that piece of ordnance? One shot would blow us right out of the water. The steamer had a big fat captain who had his cap pulled down over one eye. His voice, even when he whispered, was a deep bellow. You should have heard it through the megaphone. The steamer drew near, and the captain raised his megaphone.
What the hell's the matter with you?
His voice boomed across like the rumble of our old cannon. We cut off the smoke and flame. It looked as if we had fought our fire successfully. Schmidt, the captain's beautiful wife, tripped along the deck with coquettish movements of shoulders and hips. The officers on the steamer's bridge eyed the fair vision and exchanged smiles with that rogue of a Schmidt. Nor was the fat captain insensible to the feminine charms. He rolled his eyes and grinned with the expression of a skipper who can easily cut his officers out. "Look at the wireless, Ludemann," I said, "and the 5-inch gun." "Clear deck for action," I roared. Instantly, the beautiful Schmidt threw off his silken dress, and in the uniform of a German gob kicked his blonde wig around the deck. The Britishers stared aghast. The German flag ran up. Our riflemen arose from behind the rail, ready to pick off anyone who tried to handle the 5-inch gun. Bang, crash, and our gun knocked over the wireless shack. A tremendous detonation, and our false smokestack cannon added its voice to the general effect. The steamer's crew swarmed on deck and ran around like crazed animals. The captain telephoned his order to start the engines. His engine crew was on deck as panicky as the others. He ordered the boats swung out. His men were already doing that as well as their fright allowed.
Clear the deck for action!
That only gave the crew an even greater scare. I shouted to him, "Lay to, or I will sink you." I had to admire that captain. The fat fellow dominated the frightened mob by sheer force of lung power. His voice seemed to sweep the deck and master everything.
Gun crew to their posts! By Joe, you scallywags! Gun crew to their posts, damn it!
We stood watching. I didn't think he could do it, but the panic stilled. The frightened men stood at a kind of attention. The gun crew separated themselves from the crowd. It looked as though there would be a fight, his cannon against our rifles. Well, we could pick them off, and that fat soul of the situation would be an excellent mark to shoot at. We had one more device left. I gave the signal. From the mastheads boomed three voices through the megaphones in unison. The shout was in English and seemed to dominate the ocean to the horizon.
Torpedoes clear.
On the deck of the steamship, a crazed yell overtook all other voices.
No torpedoes! For God's sake, no torpedoes!
Handkerchiefs, napkins, towels, and anything white was waved. The cook frantically waved his apron. "Lay to," I shouted, "or we will discharge our torpedoes." There was no further sound. The fat captain was licked by the terror the torpedo inspired in everyone who sailed on ships. He made no further protest. He could not have done anything with his men now, but I don't think he liked torpedoes either. He sat down on a deck chair, cursing and wiping the sweat off of his face. We still had to be careful. There were plenty of firearms aboard that ship, rifles, grenades, and whatnot. I kept our riflemen at the rail, ready to cover our boarding party and to shoot down anyone who went near the 5-inch gun. Still with the idea of keeping the men on the steamer overawed, I sent my 8 strongest men as the boarding crew under the command of my giant prize officer. They had been among the strongest men in Germany. One was the wrestling champion of Saxony, another the wrestling champion of Westphalia. One, a Bavarian who had been a sculptor's model, who had been in high demand for posing due to his prodigious muscle development. Any one of these fellows could bring up a 220-pound weight with one hand. They went with bare arms and shoulders. They had long bamboo poles with hooks at the end. They reached up with the poles, caught the hooks on the deck of the captured ship, and climbed hand over hand. The men on deck looked down as they ascended, awestruck.
What fellows, by Jove? No. We're not going to fight with those fellows.
Our prisoners came aboard. Among them were 8 British Marines who had been assigned to the steamer as a gun crew. The fat captain looked around our deck with a sort of belligerent curiosity. He walked up to our smokestack gun, and you couldn't tell his face from a beat.
Captain, is that the thing that made that hell of a racket?
Yes.
Where are your torpedoes?
Torpedoes? We don't have torpedoes.
No torpedoes? That was fake too?
Yes, I'm afraid so, Captain.
By Joe, Captain. Don't report that by Joe.
I promised him I would not report it, and told him heartily that he had behaved like a true British skipper, and no man could have done better. Aye, things have changed on the sea. When I went aboard that steamer, I had to sit there and look around and think. She was a freighter. And what were freighters like when I was before the mast? That wasn't so long ago, 20-odd years, but ships and customs change rapidly. I was in a magnificent saloon with heavy carpets, glittering candelabra, and big luxurious club chairs. Paintings in heavy frames hung on the wall. In one corner was a Steinway grand piano, and beside it a music rack. There were other musical instruments, a melodeon, a violin, a guitar, a ukulele. Freighters nowadays often have better officers' accommodations than passenger ships. They have more space for them, and their voyages are longer, sometimes a year or more. The ship owners provide comforts and luxuries to make the long periods at sea less burdensome. The sailors, too, are put up in far better style than formerly. In my time, even on the biggest freight steamers, the officers had simple quarters, and the seamen had little more comfort than they had on sailing ships. I remembered the various ships on which I had hauled at ropes and swabbed the deck. By Joe, I thought, if they had told you of anything like this, you would have thought them ready for the lunatic asylum. The hold of the steamer was no less interesting than the officers' saloon. The cargo was valued at £1 million sterling. It included 500 cases of rare cognac and 2,300 cases of champagne, Veuve Clicquot. That was something. We took the musical instruments, the piano, violin, cello, and all. We had aboard the Seeadler, a pianist and a violinist, both excellent musicians out of the German conservatories. We had no room in our cabins to hang paintings, so I gave them to our captive captains to take with them when they left our ship. Some of the expensive furniture fitted nicely in the Seeadler's cabins. Of the cognac and champagne, we ferried aboard as much as we could stow away. We opened the sea cocks of the steamer, and she settled down peacefully beneath the waves. And there you have it. Thank you for listening to this presentation of the Sixth House Historical Society. This story was taken from a chapter in the 1928 book, Count Luckner, the Sea Devil, by Lowell Thomas. Subscribe for more sporadic updates, and let me know what types of historical tales I should cover next. I have an extensive collection of old historical texts to pull excerpts from. Till next we meet, farewell.
Wait, I want to say goodbye too. No, come back.